Good evening, it's V again today, and I've just finished reading a really long fantasy book called The Helm of Midnight by Marina Lostetter. So, this story follows three different characters in three different timelines, but it begins at a jubilee where there are a lot of really dangerous magical artifacts on display. So the main character, Krona, is what they call a regulator. Like the regulators in this city are essentially part of the arm of law enforcement that's in charge of keeping an eye on the way different magical things are used. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But there was an attack during this jubilee where two really dangerous artifacts are stolen. So one was a jewel called a despair stone, like a really powerful one, which is like a gem that contains so much despair that if you like give it to a person, they essentially, I guess, lose the will to live. Then there was the mask of a mass murderer. So masks are a really integral part of the way the society works in this world. Like whenever a person dies, like a lot of the time a death mask is created for them, and this mask is like serves as a way of preserving like something that the person was really good at. Like for instance, if you're really good with languages, then they might create a death mask for you that helps to preserve this skill so that later generations could, when they need a facility for languages, put it on and temporarily gain the abilities that this person had when they were alive. So this particular mask, though, is a little different in that nobody really knows like how it came to be in the first place, since no one logically would create a death mask for a mass murderer, but that's basically what they did, or for a serial killer. And this particular mask is stolen, which causes a great deal of turmoil because this person basically terrorized the citizenry for a while, like about 10 years ago, for think Jack the Ripper style, like really bloody, gruesome type killings. And there's a great deal of concern that now whoever has the mask, like, what are they gonna do with it? And the return of this killer into their society. So Krona is trying to track down, along with her team, the people who stole these items and to try to prevent the repeat of incidents from 10 years ago. So then we have a character called Melody. So her timeline in the story starts about 2 years before the present day. She is in this timeline like a healer, but back then, like in the past 2 years ago, she arrived in the city with her mother, who's extremely ill. And her goal is to borrow like the mask of a healer in order to gain like the ability to find a cure to help save her mother. Then the final plot line follows actually the healer who became the serial killer. Like his name is Louis, and it tells the story starting from a bit over 10 years ago of like how he eventually came to like take so many people's lives. So I'm gonna start, I guess, with something I did not like as much for this book. So two things. One was I think there was often a lot of tension between like the character relationships often felt a little uneasy in a way that made it maybe not as enjoyable to read as I would have liked. Like I don't mean the kind of tension where not like suspense kind of tension. I mean tension like, for instance, with Krona and her sister. Like her sister is also her captain in the regulators, and then there's that tension of like how her performance might reflect on her sister. There's the fact that they're both trying to protect each other, and but also not necessarily sharing like everything that they're thinking or feeling with one another. Like there's a lot of uneasiness and like a lack of comfort, I suppose, in the relations that people have, even between the people who care a lot about each other. And like I often prefer, like I like to read about relationships that feel closer, I suppose. But anyways, I think it created a kind of feeling where I often didn't necessarily want to continue reading about them, like when I put the book down, because I didn't really look forward to going back into that kind of relationship. And of course, also, I guess another thing to mention as a heads up is just uh, the gruesomeness of the killings. Like, I did read a couple of Louis' parts from the beginning. Like, he is a really interesting character, and his line is pretty important to understanding what is happening in the current day. But after the first few sections, like, I could pretty much predict the awful direction it was going to take, so I skipped most of his later sections because it was kind of too horrible to read. So despite that, I did really like the world. Like, it was a really, really interesting world to experience. So just a couple things, for instance, that were kind of quirky that stood out to me. So they have 5 city-states in this world where people live. Like, they have a kind of barrier that keeps this area safe for humans, and it sounds like the land beyond is actually really dangerous and inhospitable. And a lot of things in their world come in 5. So they have 5 different materials that hold magic well. They have 5 different types of what they call Vaga, which are their monsters. Like, I mentioned that monsters attack the Jubilee at the beginning. So their monsters are like these beasts that have different abilities, like the 5 different kinds have. For instance, they have jumpers that can teleport from place to place. They have mimic type ones that can take on appearances to fool people, and they can only be harmed by one of the 5 different types of materials that can hold magic. Like, you have to shoot them with these needles that helps to drain their energy or life force or whatever it is. Anyways, it makes them weaker, but you can't actually kill them. So when they're really weak, they turn into a gaseous substance that you then have to like suck into a magical bottle and then store away somewhere in order to keep them like safely contained and away from people. Then you have like the masks that I mentioned before, which are such a big part of their society, and then like even their monetary system. Like, instead of coins, they actually use bottled time. Like, when a person is born, like as a baby, you pay what they call a time tax. So I think they said it was about, was it 5 years or something? I don't remember exactly how much, but a certain amount of time is taken from a person and turned into, like, they keep them in these vials and stuff, and this is actually what people use as currency. So, as people get older, like get closer to the end of their lives, you can choose to what they call like a cash in, and that's why like wealthy people might live quite a bit longer than less wealthy people, because this is actually what their commerce is based on. So yeah, like there's a lot of really interesting things about the way the world is put together. So even though like when I put the book down, like I didn't always necessarily really feel like picking it up again because of the tension with the characters, once I did start reading, it was really easy to keep reading because it was just such an interesting place to learn about.